welcome to The Explainer. We're going to be diving deep today, using personal diaries and military records to get past the myth and find the truth behind one of the most famous symbols of war in all of history.
So we're talking about one of World War II's most misunderstood subjects, the kamikaze. I mean, you hear that word and an image immediately pops into your head, right? But the real story, well, it's buried under layers of myth and propaganda.
You know, the name itself, kamikaze, it literally means divine wind. And that name has this powerful, almost mythical backstory. It actually comes from way back in the 13th century, when these two huge Mongol invasion fleets were basically wiped out by typhoons. For Japan, it was like a divine miracle, and that idea became a huge part of their national identity. So, who were the men behind this myth? Why did they fly these one-way missions? I think we've all got this picture in our heads, right? Fanatical pilots screaming war cries as they dive. But the truth, it's so much more complicated and honestly so much more human than that. Okay, let's really get into it. All right, first up, the divine wind myth. We're talking honor, glory, and sacrifice. Before we get to the reality, we've got to understand the official story. You know, the myth that was very carefully built up. And this popular image of the kamikaze is all tied up in the samurai code of Bushido, where things like loyalty and honor, especially honor and death, were everything. So the propaganda machine at the time went into overdrive. It painted this picture of totally willing warriors, just embracing death to protect their homeland. They were framed as these modern-day samurai, guys for whom death was, and this is a quote, lighter than a feather compared to their duty. And get this, the state even promised that their souls would become these guardian spirits, honored by the emperor himself. I mean, that's a powerful narrative to sell, not just to the world, but to your own people. But here's the twist. That whole narrative, it wasn't the real reason. The kamikaze tactic wasn't really born from this deep-seated fanaticism. It was a strategy of pure, cold desperation in the face of certain defeat. And to really get why, we have to rewind the clock to 1944 and see just how bad things were for Japan. By 1944, Japan's military situation was, to put it mildly, a catastrophe. The Battle of Midway had absolutely crippled their carrier fleet. Then you had these brutal, grinding campaigns in places like the Solomon Islands and New Guinea that just wiped out their best, most experienced pilots. And then came the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, I mean, the name says it all, where they lost over 400 more planes and pilots in a ridiculously short time. The final nail in the coffin? The fall of Saipan. Suddenly, American B-29s could strike the Japanese home islands directly. The war was coming home. And this chart right here just lays it all out, the massive imbalance of power. Look at this. Japan was throwing outdated planes with barely trained recruits into the air. And what were they facing? Newer, better American planes like the Hellcat and Corsair, and just overwhelming numbers of them. They had completely lost control of the air and the sea. At this point, even a normal attack was basically a suicide mission anyway. So you can see the writing on the wall. Conventional attacks are failing spectacularly. So Vice Admiral Onishi comes up with this radical, desperate solution. He forms the Special Attack Units. The logic behind it was just cold, hard math. One pilot, one plane might be able to hit an aircraft carrier and take it out of the fight for weeks. It was a terrible calculus. But the big question is, who were the men they actually sent to do this? And here's where the propaganda myth just completely falls apart. These guys weren't the elite samurai warriors from the posters. Not even close. Out of about 4,000 pilots, a staggering 3/4 of them were what they called boy pilots. We're talking teenagers, some as young as 17, with just the bare minimum of training needed to get a plane in the air. The rest? They were university students, drafted early. And these weren't fanatics. Many were liberals, well-read in Western philosophy and literature. It's just not the image you'd expect. And the training? Oh man, one survivor called it a living hell. Just read this quote. "I was struck on the face so hard and frequently that my face was no longer recognizable." This wasn't about building up their fighting spirit. It was the exact opposite. This kind of brutal daily punishment was designed to completely break them, to just stamp out any sense of patriotism and replace it with a kind of robotic obedience. So now we get to the really personal stuff. This is where we see the massive gap between the heroic story the state was selling and what these pilots were actually feeling. And we know this because of the diaries, the poems, the last letters they wrote. These documents are like a window straight into their minds. Okay, so this is the official line, right? The state ideology drilled into every single soldier. It came from the Imperial rescript. And it basically said that your duty to the emperor is heavier than a mountain, but your own death, that's lighter than a feather. That was the public face of sacrifice.
But then you read what they actually wrote. And this is from Lieutenant Yukio Seki. He was the leader of the very first official kamikaze mission. And look what he says. I am not going on this mission for the emperor or for the empire. I am going because I was ordered to. That just says it all, doesn't it? This wasn't about ideology for him. It was about being a soldier who was given an order he simply could not refuse. And that's really the crucial point here. When you read their diaries, you don't find fanatics screaming for the emperor. You find thoughtful, educated young men who were wrestling with philosophy, thinking about unrequited love, and just filled with sorrow about dying so young. They were trapped in this impossible situation, trying to find some kind of meaning in a death that was basically handed down to them by a military machine that gave them no other way out. Okay, so we've seen who these men really were. But what about the impact? What was the tactical reality? I mean, did this incredibly desperate strategy actually work? Well, the human cost was just staggering. On the Japanese side alone, about 3,800 pilots were sacrificed in these attacks. And let's be clear, when these attacks did hit their mark, they were absolutely terrifying and deadly. They killed more than 7,000 Allied personnel and wounded thousands more. But, and this is a huge but, despite that horrifying human cost on both sides, the vast majority of these attacks just failed. We're looking at a success rate of maybe 14 to 19% tops. Most of the planes were shot down by the massive walls of anti-aircraft fire, or they had mechanical problems, or they just plain missed. So yeah, they did damage hundreds of ships, and that's not nothing. But in the end, they never sank a single large aircraft carrier or battleship. So this tactic that was born from pure desperation, it couldn't stop the Allied war machine, and it didn't change the outcome of the war, not one bit. What's really fascinating is how Japan remembers this history today, because it's pretty divided. The official school textbooks, they barely touch the subject, probably because they don't want to be seen as glorifying militarism. But then you go to the local level, to towns like Chiron, where these pilots actually took off from. And there you find museums and all these grassroots efforts focused on one thing, preserving the human stories, the personal memories of the pilots themselves. Which kind of leaves us with this final difficult question. How should a nation remember its most complex heroes? Because the one thing that's clear is that the kamikaze weren't just the single block of fanatics. They were thousands of individual people, students, teenagers, sons, brothers, who got caught in the gears of total war. Their story really forces us to look past the myth, to question those simple, easy labels of hero or fanatic, and to just sit with the profound human tragedy at the heart of it all.